The stillness of the void was shattered as the Galactic Fleet's command center blazed to life. Admiral Therak's eyes narrowed, his sharp gaze flicking from the holographic map of the solar system to the viewports where the stars lay spread across the infinite black. The silence was oppressive, an uneasy calm before the storm. For over a millennium, his fleet had swept across the galaxy unchallenged, quashing every uprising, conquering every frontier. Today, that unshakable dominance was about to be tested. "Report," Therak's voice was a quiet command, slicing through the tense air of the control room. Captain Kayla's fingers danced over the console, her focus unbroken. "Admiral, there is a massive anomaly, a fleet, entering the system. Their size is incomprehensible. It's human." Therak's pulse quickened. He'd heard the legends. The humans were a primitive race, their technology far below that of the galactic nations. But the sheer scope of what was before them didn't match any known intelligence. The Earth, a distant blue speck of a planet, had always been overlooked, until now. "Are we sure?" "Earth hasn't been a threat in centuries," Therak said, trying to anchor his disbelief in reason. Kayla swiveled to face him. "I've never seen anything like it, Admiral. They're coming in fast, beyond anything we've observed from them before. Their ships, they're beyond anything we've catalogued." The hologram flickered, showing ships the size of moons emerging from a nearby sector. There was a cold, mechanical precision to their movement, the ships gliding like predatory leviathans in the dark sea of space. "Commander Zelric," Therak called. A young officer stepped forward, his fiery gaze betraying the unease he tried to mask with bravado. "Yes, Admiral. Initiate a full sensor sweep of their fleet. I want every detail. Now." Zelric nodded and rushed to his station, fingers flying over the console. His eagerness was palpable, a hunger to prove himself that often led him to reckless decisions. But in this case, that very eagerness might save them. They're powering weapons, Admiral," Zelric said, his voice faltering. "Their weapons are unlike any we've encountered before. This isn't just a small skirmish fleet." Therak's mind raced. "Prepare the fleet for a defensive posture, all ships on alert. It's time we learn just how dangerous Earth truly is." Kayla spoke again, her voice a steady anchor amidst the growing tension. "Admiral, they're not responding to our hails. They're locking in on us. I don't think they want to talk." Therak's lips pressed into a thin line. The humans were famously stubborn, their independence a driving force throughout their history. But this was different. The scale of their fleet alone suggested a power beyond anything he'd anticipated. "Send a message to the Council. They need to know what we're up against." He paused, glancing out the viewport at the vast expanse of stars. "We won't be the first to underestimate humanity again." As the fleet continued to approach, the tension within the command center thickened. The hum of the ship's engines reverberated through the walls, an unsettling reminder of the waiting battle. The room was filled with the sounds of hurried voices and rapid commands as the fleet's readiness grew. Kayla's eyes met Therak's, a silent understanding passing between them. The fate of the galaxy was shifting. The message had barely been sent before the silence of the room shattered once more. Zelric's voice cut through the air with alarming urgency. "Admiral. They've fired." The command center was filled with the sound of blaring alarms. The first strike, an enormous blast of energy, slammed into the fleet's outermost ships. The shockwave rattled the station, throwing officers from their feet. Therak's mind raced, but his body moved with practiced precision. He gripped the edge of the console, steadying himself, his heart pounding. "Deploy shields. Return fire." Therak barked, his calm facade cracking just slightly under the weight of the situation. There was no time for further analysis. They were already under attack, and Earth's ships were not the weaklings they had expected. The first wave of fire had crippled one of their smaller vessels, a terrifying sign of what was to come. Kayla moved to his side, her voice sharp with command. "Admiral, we need to fall back. We can't withstand this, our shields are barely holding." Therak's mind raced, calculating his next move. Their defenses were solid, but not against this kind of firepower. He glanced once more at the map. Earth's dreadnoughts were too advanced, too powerful. His fleet, a well-oiled machine for hundreds of years, was suddenly on the defensive, outgunned and outmaneuvered. Retreat is not an option, Theric said, his voice hardening. Hold steady. We will make them understand that we do not surrender. Kayla looked at him, her eyes searching for the confidence that once existed in every command he gave. But she said nothing. The battle for the galaxy was just beginning, and she knew what was at stake. Theric turned his gaze back to the viewport, his jaw set. Earth's dreadnoughts loomed large on the horizon, their dark silhouettes casting a shadow over the entire fleet. This was no ordinary enemy. They were something else, something humanity had never been before. And it was a challenge he would not back away from. Prepare to engage, Theric said, his voice low and firm. As the Galactic Fleet braced itself for the coming storm, the first of many questions lingered unanswered in Theric's mind. What kind of people were these humans, to have brought this fight to them? The vibrations of the ship were growing more pronounced, a low thrum that seemed to resonate through every wall, every floor, every surface. Admiral Theric stood at the helm of the fleet's flagship, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. The battlefield ahead was a chaotic canvas of flashing lights, streaks of energy, and distant explosions. His mind raced, but his expression remained stone-cold, his decades of command and training not allowing a flicker of uncertainty to show. Report, he demanded, his voice unwavering. Captain Kayla's fingers hovered over her console, her brow furrowed as she processed the incoming data. Shields at 52%, Admiral. The enemy's firepower is beyond anything we've encountered. They're adapting to our maneuvers with every second. Theric's eyes narrowed. The Earth dreadnoughts had already turned the tide of battle against them, striking with unmatched precision. Their weapons were unlike any he'd studied in the archives. A sophisticated combination of technology and unrelenting aggression. Humanity had built these ships with one thing in mind, to destroy anything that threatened their survival. Commander Zelric, Theric called. Zelric, standing at a neighboring console, turned with sharp eyes. His youthful face was flushed with excitement, but there was no hiding the anxiety that crept into his posture. He'd seen nothing like this before, no encounter where his abilities to predict enemy tactics were so utterly useless. Yes, Admiral, he asked, his voice carrying a slight tremor. Your analysis, Theric urged. What's their weakness? Zelric tapped away furiously at his console. It's difficult, sir. They're using adaptive fire protocols. As soon as we change tactics, they counter with even more precision. The energy pulses they're using are highly coordinated, there's no clear opening. Theric's gaze hardened as he stared out at the floating specter of the Earth fleet. Each ship, massive and imposing, glided forward with an eerie confidence. The initial shock of their fire had subsided, but their advance was relentless. The Galactic Fleet's shields were barely holding, and its weapons, though powerful, felt like toys against these new giants. Damn them, Zelric muttered under his breath, barely audible. Kayla, whose steady demeanor had not wavered since the battle began, looked at Theric. Admiral, we can't keep up with their adaptability. They'll have us cornered within the hour if we don't change something. Theric absorbed her words in silence. The situation was dire, but retreat was not an option. The reputation of his fleet, and the galaxy's perception of its invulnerability, would be shattered if they gave ground now. Still, they were facing an enemy like no other. He could see it clearly now, the relentless willpower of these humans. Theric exhaled slowly, his mind sharpening with clarity. We need to force them into a mistake. A calculated risk. Zelric looked at him with wide eyes. What kind of risk, sir? Their strength is in their adaptability. We need to outwit them. Take a page from their playbook, Theric said, his voice colder now, more focused. We can't fight them with sheer power alone. But we can make them underestimate us. Kayla raised an eyebrow. What are you suggesting? Theric's lips curled into a grim smile. an ambush. The moments after the plan was set into motion were filled with tension. The fleet's ships, battered and on the edge of collapse, began to move in staggered formations. The Earth ships followed in pursuit, confident that the weakened Galactic Fleet was attempting to flee. But Theric had anticipated this. He'd baited them perfectly. "You're sure this will work, Admiral?" Kayla asked, her eyes tracking the movements of the Earth dreadnoughts on the holographic map. The distance between them and their pursuers was closing. "I'm sure," Theric replied. "The humans think we're retreating. That's what will lead them into the trap." For a moment, the fleet seemed to slip into a false rhythm, retreating further as the Earth ships advanced. The tension on board was palpable. Officers exchanged glances, their fingers hovering over their controls, ready for the precise moment to strike. Then, it happened. With a swift command, Theric ordered the fleet to turn in unison. Their shields flared back to full capacity, and their weapons, once dormant, flared into life. The energy pulses that erupted from their ships weren't just retaliatory, they were synchronized, a calculated counterattack that sent shockwaves through the Earth fleet. "We have them!" Zelric shouted, his voice breaking with excitement. He had never been so certain in the chaos of battle. The human fleet's formation was shattered, some ships veering off course as they struggled to respond to the surprise assault. "Now, Zelric!" Theric's voice rang out. "Keep the pressure on them. We have only one chance." Zelric's hands flew across the console, activating new commands. Their ship's weapons fired in coordinated bursts, each shot expertly timed to hit weak points in the Earth dreadnoughts' defense systems. The enemy was reeling, scrambling to regain control, their formidable coordination briefly fractured. Yet, Theric's gut told him that this moment of triumph was fleeting. He saw the flashing lights in the distance, other Earth ships were arriving, their size even larger than the first wave. "Admiral, more are coming in!" Kayla shouted, her voice edged with disbelief. This was only the first wave? Theric's heart sank. He had known the humans would not back down, but the true scale of their strength was only now becoming clear. "No time to savor victory, Captain," Theric muttered. "Prepare for the second wave. We're not done yet." The sound of approaching ships reverberated through the deck, growing louder with each passing second. As the first wave of Earth dreadnoughts fell back, another more terrifying wave took their place. Theric stood tall, his eyes steely. He had underestimated their determination once. He wouldn't make that mistake again. The battle for the galaxy was far from over. The battlefield had shifted. The stars now flickered with the dark promise of more destruction as the remnants of Earth's dreadnoughts slowly regrouped. They were strong, but Theric had caught them off guard, and for that fleeting moment, his fleet had gained ground. The Galactic Command Center hummed with the subdued intensity of recovery, the aftermath of the first successful counteroffensive still hanging in the air. "Admiral," Kayla's voice broke the heavy silence, her gaze locked onto the holographic map before her. "We've bought some time, but it won't last long. More enemy ships are entering the system." Theric's jaw tightened as he surveyed the map. The numbers were increasing at an alarming rate. More dreadnoughts, more support ships, and the unrelenting pressure of an enemy that seemed to know no fear. "I can see that," he said. His voice, calm as ever, belied the tension churning inside. They'd been prepared for a tough fight, but this was different. The humans were relentless in a way the galaxy had never seen before. He turned to Commander Zelric, who was typing furiously at his console. "Any weaknesses, Commander?" Zelric looked up from his screen, eyes wide with the kind of shock that only battle could create. "Admiral, their fleet isn't just adapting, they're anticipating. We're moving unpredictably, yet they're countering every time. It's like they know what we're going to do before we even do it." Theric nodded grimly. The humans were unpredictable in ways that no algorithm could account for. Their minds, their sheer drive, were something entirely foreign to the calculated expectations of the galactic fleets. They had turned the tables on them, and now they were adjusting to every move. "This isn't about technology," Theric muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. It's about willpower. And we've underestimated theirs. Suddenly, a deep, ominous vibration surged through the floor of the command center, followed by the blaring of alarms. The entire ship shuddered as another barrage from the Earth Dreadnoughts hit their shields, sending ripples of energy cascading across the hull. "Shields down to 35%, Kayla reported, her voice tight with urgency. "We can't keep taking hits like this." "Divert all power to the front shields," Theric ordered, his calm demeanor never wavering. "We'll need to give everything to that side." Zelric's hands flew over the console, his movements rapid and precise. "Redirecting power, Admiral, but I'm not sure how long the shields will last at this rate." Theric's mind raced. His fleet had been invincible for centuries, and yet here they were, on the brink of defeat, struggling against a force that, until hours ago, had been barely a blip on their radar. They had lost the initiative, and now they were reacting instead of leading. He could feel the walls of their dominance closing in, and it made the prospect of victory feel more distant with each passing second. "Admiral, they're focusing on us," Kayla said, her voice barely a whisper as she stared at the tactical readouts. "We're the command ship. They know we're the key to your fleet. They're targeting us first." Theric's eyes hardened. "Let them come. We'll make them pay for every inch." The battle raged on, the space between the ships growing ever more chaotic. The Galactic Fleet was on its back foot, fighting to maintain order while the humans closed in like a swarm of locusts, relentlessly consuming the stars. There were no cries of war, no rallying speeches. Just the endless, crushing drum of weapons fire. Theric stood at the center of the command bridge, his back straight and his gaze fixed on the front viewport, watching the destruction unfold. Kayla stood beside him, the weight of command heavy on her shoulders. She knew their time was running out. "Admiral," Zelric's voice broke through the haze of combat, sharp and urgent. "A fleet of Earth reinforcements is coming in from behind. They've split off from the main force. We're being surrounded." Theric clenched his fists, his heart pounding in his chest. He had hoped for a moment of respite, even the smallest break in the tide, but now it was clear, this battle wasn't just a clash of fleets. It was a war of attrition, and the Earth forces weren't about to let up. "We'll need to move fast," Kayla said, her voice barely above a whisper, her eyes scanning the tactical projections for a solution. "If we don't break through soon, we're finished." Theric's eyes flicked toward the map. He could see the Earth ships, like an unrelenting tide, closing in from every direction. The heat of battle was beginning to boil over, and he knew that unless he did something drastic, his fleet would be lost. "We can't go head-to-head anymore," Theric said. "We'll need to create a diversion." A diversion was risky, especially with their dwindling resources. But there was no other option. The Earth ships were too coordinated, too powerful for a direct confrontation. He turned toward Zelric. "Prepare the secondary fleet to break formation. We'll draw their attention to the outskirts of the system." Zelric hesitated, but nodded. "Yes, sir." As he relayed the order, Theric's eyes never left the map. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. If this didn't work, his fleet would be trapped in the heart of the enemy forces, vulnerable to annihilation. Suddenly, the ship rocked violently, and the viewports exploded with light as another volley hit the hull. "Damage report." Theric barked. "The forward section is breached, Admiral," Kayla said, her voice a mix of concern and resolve. "We've lost several primary systems. Shields are down." Theric clenched his teeth. The battle was slipping through his fingers, faster than he could react. Earth's firepower was overwhelming, and their tactics were too unpredictable. He had to act now, or it would all be over. "Prepare to make the jump," Theric commanded. "We're going to fight from a different position." As the command rang through the ship, the tension in the air was palpable. Theric knew that this was no longer about winning the battle, it was about surviving it. The next moments were a blur of light and sound, as the fleet began its perilous maneuver into a new formation. The clock was ticking. The Earth forces were closing in, and every second counted. The war was far from over, but for the first time, Theric felt the true weight of the fight ahead. The hum of the command bridge was deafening. Theric's hands gripped the armrests of his chair, his knuckles white, as he watched the battle unfold through the viewport. The black void of space was marred by flickering explosions, the distant glow of his fleet's weapons fire, and the unyielding approach of the Earth dreadnoughts. His fingers twitched, itching for action, but every option seemed to lead to one inescapable truth: they were cornered. "Admiral, our shields are gone," Kayla's voice cut through the growing tension, her face pale but resolute as she stood by her console. "Hull integrity at 12%. Prepare for evasive maneuvers," Theric ordered, his voice calm, yet heavy with the burden of his command. "Deploy the last of the decoy drones." The ship shuddered again as another barrage from the Earth ships pummeled their defenses, sending tremors through the floor. The decoys launched, tiny, fragile ships meant to draw the fire away from the main fleet. For a brief moment, it seemed like a sliver of hope, but Theric knew it was only a temporary distraction. The Earth forces were too coordinated, too relentless. "They're focused on the decoys," Zelric said from his station, his voice sharp as he scanned the readouts. "But it won't last. The humans are too clever, they'll adjust." Theric nodded, his gaze fixed on the holographic map in front of him. "We need to strike before they adjust. If we don't, they'll tear us apart." The Earth fleet, a well-oiled machine of precision, had adapted to every move Theric's forces had made. It was unlike anything he had ever encountered. This wasn't a battle of ships or firepower, it was a contest of wills, and humanity had proven itself relentless. He had underestimated them. No, he had underestimated the power of human resolve. "We don't have much time," Kayla said, stepping closer to Theric. "What's the plan?" Theric's eyes narrowed. They had one final option, one risky, suicidal maneuver that could either turn the tide or condemn them to oblivion. It was a long shot, but it was all they had. "The main fleet will retreat," Theric declared, his voice firm. "We'll feint a retreat toward the nebula, but we're not running. We're drawing them in." Kayla's eyes widened in understanding, and Zelric looked up, disbelief written across his face. "You want to pull them into the trap," Theric interrupted, his eyes cold with determination. "We'll engage the secondary fleet on a direct collision course with their front lines. With our primary ships focused on the nebula's dense field, we'll have the element of surprise." "But, Admiral," Kayla began, "you'll be cutting our forces in half. The Earth fleet is already too strong. We'll make them pay for every inch," Theric finished, his tone unwavering. "It's the only way." The tension in the room was palpable, the weight of the decision hanging heavy on every officer present. This was it. There were no more tricks, no more time for second-guessing. This was a final gambit. Theric turned to his comms officer. "Signal the fleet. Full retreat toward the nebula. Set course for an intercept point, now." The officer's fingers flew across the console, relaying the orders. The command ship shuddered again, a violent jolt as another round of enemy fire connected with the hull, causing the lights to flicker. Theric clenched his fists, fighting the surge of frustration that rose within him. The Earth forces weren't just outgunning them, they were outthinking them. "Admiral," Kayla said, her voice quieter now, laced with an edge of doubt. "What if they don't take the bait?" "They will," Theric replied. "They're relentless. They won't let us go. And once we have them close enough, we'll strike from within." He turned his gaze to the viewport again, eyes scanning the chaos unfolding in the distance. The dreadnoughts loomed larger, their imposing forms advancing, their weapons charging for the kill. But Theric knew the humans couldn't resist the bait. They would follow, thinking they could finish them off easily. And that's when the trap would close. Moments later, the ship jolted as it began its sharp turn toward the nebula, its engines roaring to life in a desperate attempt to escape the ever-encroaching Earth fleet. The secondary fleet veered off to one side, pulling away to create a gap in the formation, as though fleeing the battlefield. In that moment, Theric felt the weight of the gamble press down on him. "Distance to intercept point?" Theric asked, his voice calm but tinged with urgency. 5 minutes, Admiral, Zelric responded, his fingers tapping urgently at the console. The Earth fleet is adjusting course. They're following us into the nebula. Theric's heart pounded in his chest. This was it. The fleet would be forced into the tight corridors of the nebula, and in the haze of the dense gas clouds, the Earth forces would be at their most vulnerable. But the risk was immense. If they failed, if the trap didn't close in time, the Earth dreadnoughts would tear them apart, one by one. The seconds felt like hours as the ships hurtled toward the nebula's edge. The approaching dreadnoughts followed, their hulking forms blocking out the stars. It was almost too late. Theric's pulse quickened as he counted down the moments. Prepare for evasive maneuvers, he barked. When the trap is sprung, there's no turning back. Kayla's eyes met his. There was fear in them, fear for the fleet, fear for their lives. But there was also something else. Something deeper. Hope. And Theric knew that hope, no matter how fragile, would be the key to their survival. The nebula loomed ahead, an impenetrable veil of swirling gas and dust, hiding the approaching battle. Theric's heart pounded in his chest as the seconds ticked down. Every part of him screamed that the plan was too risky, but there was no turning back now. The Earth fleet had taken the bait, following them into the vast, chaotic expanse of the nebula, where visibility was nearly non-existent, and every ship was left to its own devices. The bridge of the command ship was silent, save for the steady hum of the engines and the occasional beep from the consoles. Theric stood, watching the dim, flickering lights cast eerie shadows across his officers' faces. He knew what was at stake. This wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a fight for the future of his people. The galaxy, in all its vastness, was watching. If they failed here, their enemies would be emboldened, and humanity would not stop until they had conquered everything. Admiral, Zelric's voice broke the silence, low and tense, we've entered the nebula's edge. Visibility is down to 3%, the instruments are barely holding up. Keep steady, Theric ordered, his voice as calm as he could manage. We move forward, and when the time comes, we strike. A soft murmur rippled through the bridge as the crew braced for what was to come. Theric's eyes flickered to Kayla, who stood beside him, her posture rigid with readiness. Are we really going through with this? Kayla asked, her voice barely above a whisper, though the fear in her eyes was unmistakable. We have no choice, Theric replied, his gaze narrowing at the sensor readouts. The Earth fleet believes we're retreating. We give them one final push. Then we destroy them. Kayla didn't argue. She knew as well as he did that this was their only chance. If they didn't succeed now, there would be no tomorrow. Suddenly, an alarm blared to life across the bridge, sharp and shrill. Enemy ships approaching, Admiral, the sensor officer shouted. They're closing in fast. Their front line is almost on top of us. The battle had begun. Theric's fingers tightened around the armrest of his command chair. His crew worked in perfect unison, sending commands to the fleet, ensuring their ships moved in precise formation within the dense cloud. The nebula was a dangerous place, but it was their best hope. Earth's dreadnoughts, massive and heavily armed, were formidable, but they were not built for such confined, chaotic environments. Now, Theric said, barely a whisper. The fleet's secondary ships, previously concealed in the nebula's clouds, broke formation, suddenly racing toward the Earth dreadnoughts with the force of a battering ram. The enemy ships, confident and focused on the decoy forces, hadn't anticipated the attack. But before they could react, the deadly explosion of energy from hidden ships shattered the stillness, striking the heart of the Earth fleet. A deafening barrage rang out, and for a brief moment, the vast nebula was lit up with brilliant explosions. The force of the impacts rocked Theric's ship, sending waves of energy through the hull, but he stood resolute. The Earth fleet was now caught in the web they had spun. Keep them contained, Theric ordered. Focus fire on their engines. Disable their forward momentum. But as his forces attacked, it became clear that the Earth fleet wasn't simply retreating. They were evolving. Admiral, Kayla spoke urgently, her face pale with the realization. They're adapting. They've recalculated their trajectory. They're not retreating, they're engaging in a counteroffensive. Therak's eyes widened. He had misjudged them. Humanity's ingenuity was greater than he'd anticipated. The Earth Dreadnoughts, instead of panicking, were using their sheer size and firepower to break through the nebula's disorienting cloud, focusing on taking out the ships trying to get in close. The human strategy had shifted, their instinct for survival had kicked in. In that instant, Therak realized something profound: Earth's strength wasn't just in its technology or its numbers. It was in the relentless will of its people, the determination to never back down, no matter how impossible the odds seemed. This fight was as much about that spirit as it was about military might. "Adjust course," Therak barked, a fierce determination rising within him. "We will not be outsmarted again." The fleet shifted, regrouping in the heart of the nebula. The space around them was now filled with explosions, flashing lights, and the shrieking wail of failing shields. Therak's thoughts raced. There had to be a way to use the nebula to their advantage, to force the Earth Dreadnoughts into a position where they couldn't escape. And then it came to him. "Prepare for a direct assault," Therak ordered. "All ships focus fire on their center line, now." As the fleet roared forward, Therak's ship joined in the charge, breaking through the clouds and targeting the most vulnerable part of the Earth fleet. The clash was brutal, lightning-fast exchanges of fire, every ship pushing forward with all its might, with no room for hesitation. For a moment, it seemed like they might succeed. The Earth fleet's forward lines were being torn apart, their ships slowly grinding to a halt under the pressure. But then, from the heart of the Earth formation, a single dreadnought broke free, charging directly at Therak's ship. This was it. The final test. "Brace for impact," Therak shouted, his eyes fixed on the looming dreadnought. The ships collided, and for a brief, blinding moment, everything went silent. When the smoke cleared, the once imposing Earth Dreadnought was nothing but wreckage, its systems completely fried. The remaining ships, seeing their flagship fall, hesitated. Therak stood, eyes scanning the battlefield. The Earth fleet was broken, their confidence shattered. The enemy's relentless push had turned into a retreat. "We've won," Kayla whispered, her voice filled with disbelief and relief. Therak, his chest still heaving with adrenaline, nodded. They had done it. The humans had been relentless, but they had underestimated the power of unity, of will. The Earth fleet had fallen, not because of might, but because they had fought with everything they had, against all odds. The war wasn't over, but today, they had won.